Get this child out of my courtroom now! The sound of the judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Judge Harrison's face burned crimson as he pointed toward the tiny boy standing beside his trembling mother. The courtroom erupted in laughter, sharp, cruel, echoing off marble walls. What is this, a school play? A woman in the back jeered. A man added with a sneer, "Look at him, dressed like a lawyer in his daddy's clothes." The bailiff's boots struck the floor like warning drums as he stormed toward the boy. "Move it, kid. You're making a fool of yourself." The boy didn't move. His name was Eli Carter, and though he was only 9 years old, his brown eyes burned with the kind of fire that made grown men hesitate. His mother, Renee, reached out, her voice cracking. "Please, he's just trying to help me." "Silence!" the judge roared. "I will not tolerate this circus. Remove him or I'll hold you both in contempt." The gallery howled with laughter. Someone started clapping, slow and mocking. But Eli didn't flinch. He raised his chin and spoke calmly, his voice steady as stone. "Your Honor," he said, "under Federal Rule 17, I have the right to represent my mother as her next friend." The room froze. The laughter died instantly, replaced by stunned silence. The judge's face turned ghostly white. The lawyer stopped whispering. What just happened? No one in that courtroom, no one in all of Fairview County could have guessed that a 9-year-old boy was about to uncover one of the most powerful conspiracies the city had ever seen. But to understand how Eli Carter, a kid with scuffed shoes and a second-hand briefcase, ended up facing off against some of the most powerful people in the state, we have to go back 3 weeks earlier. The Fairview Towers apartment sat on the edge of the city like a scar no one wanted to look at. Paint peeled off the walls in long, curling strips. The air reeked of dampness and rot. The heating hadn't worked all winter. Mold had grown so thick in some apartments that it climbed like vines, spreading across ceilings and bedsheets. Inside apartment 6C, Eli Carter sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by piles of books taller than he was. Thick volumes of law, court cases, and old statutes. His tiny fingers flipped through the pages as his lips moved silently. He had taught himself to read when he was 3. By 6, he was correcting adults on grammar. By 9, he was quoting case law from memory. The books weren't his. They were rescued from a dumpster behind the county law library when the old editions were thrown out. Most kids collected trading cards. Eli collected legal loopholes. "Eli, baby, come eat something," his mother called softly from the kitchen. Her voice was gentle but tired, so tired it seemed to hang in the air. "Just a few more pages, Mama," he answered, eyes still on the book. He wasn't playing lawyer. He was preparing for battle even if he didn't know it yet. Renee worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices before dawn, stocking grocery shelves during the day, and delivering takeout until midnight. At 29, she carried the kind of exhaustion that years of survival carve into a person. But she never complained. Everything she did, every blister, every skipped meal, was for her son. Their landlord, Victor Lang, was a man who could smile while ruining lives. He owned over 150 low-income buildings across the city and drove a different imported car every day. He bragged that he made money off the poor because they don't have a choice. His business model was cruel and simple. Buy broken-down apartments, ignore maintenance, then sue tenants when the inevitable damage appeared. A leaky ceiling, tenant fault, cracked walls, negligence, mold and rot, unsanitary living. He demanded thousands in repair fees most families could never pay. And when they couldn't, he evicted them, took their deposits, and rented the same apartment to the next desperate family. It worked like a machine, one that turned human suffering into profit. But one day, that machine picked the wrong family. 3 weeks before the courtroom chaos, Renee came home from her second job holding a stack of legal papers. Her hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped them. "They're suing us, Eli," she whispered. "They're saying we destroyed the apartment. $50,000 in damages." Eli looked up from his books. "That can't be true, Mama. You told them about the mold. You took pictures, remember?" "I did, but they don't care. Their lawyer says if we don't pay, they'll evict us." Renee's voice broke. "I don't have $50,000, Eli. I don't even have 50. He took the papers and read them, his eyes scanning every line like a detective. The words were designed to confuse, to scare. Gross negligence or property destruction, tenant liability. But beneath the jargon, he saw the truth. "Mama," he said quietly, "this isn't right. They're lying, and they're using the law because they think we don't understand it." "What can we do?" she asked hopelessly. "We don't need a lawyer," Eli said, his small hand closing around hers. "We just need to learn how to fight like one." That night, while Renee finally slept after another 18-hour day, Eli stayed awake. He surrounded himself with books, his lamp flickering against pages of handwritten notes. He studied property law, tenant rights, and every federal statute he could find. He discovered something powerful, something buried deep in the legal code called next friend representation. It meant that if someone couldn't represent themselves in court, another person, no matter their age, could do it for them in emergencies. The next morning, the eviction notice came. A man in a leather jacket banged on their door like he was raiding the place. Renee opened it, heart pounding, and signed the papers with shaking hands. Eli watched silently. His jaw set. He wasn't just angry, he was awakening. Over the next week, Renee tried everything. Legal aid offices, full pro bono lawyers, waitlisted for months, friends, struggling themselves, each no chipped away at her spirit. She stopped eating properly, surviving on instant coffee and crackers. She lost one of her jobs after missing shifts to deal with court papers, and every time she looked at her son, guilt tore at her. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered one night. "Maybe we should just move. They said if we leave quietly, they won't come after us for the money." Eli looked up from a stack of documents. His small voice was steady. "Mama, if we leave, they win. If we fight, we can stop them. Not just for us, for everyone they've hurt." She smiled weakly, brushing his hair back. "You're too young to carry this kind of burden, Eli." He met her eyes. "Then I'll just have to grow up faster." That night, as the city slept, a 9-year-old boy with a second-hand suit began writing the opening lines of a legal revolution. The courthouse smelled like old wood and polished lies. Eli Carter walked through its heavy doors, clutching a worn brown briefcase that looked too big for his small hands. His shoes were scuffed, his tie crooked, but his eyes burned with calm purpose. Behind the front counter sat a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Allen. She'd been working there for over 20 years and had seen every kind of person walk through that lobby, but never a child in a suit. "Sweetheart," she said kindly, "are you lost? You looking for your parents?" Eli shook his head. "No, ma'am. I'm here to file a motion for next friend representation in the case of Carter versus Lang Properties." Mrs. Allen blinked. She thought she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "I'm representing my mother under emergency circumstances," Eli said clearly. "Federal Rule 17 allows it." For a moment, all the sounds in the room seemed to stop. Typing paused. Conversations died mid-sentence. Everyone was watching. Mrs. Allen stared at him. "You can't file that. You're a child." Eli nodded politely. "Ma'am, with respect, could you please show me the specific statute that says a child cannot file a motion under emergency representation?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "There was no such rule." He kept going, his tone respectful but firm. "My mother is sick from exhaustion caused by this lawsuit. She can't represent herself right now. That makes me her next friend under law. I have all documentation ready." Mrs. Allen looked down at the stack of perfectly typed papers. Each page was signed, referenced, and formatted to perfection. She had seen licensed attorneys mess up worse. "I'll have to ask my supervisor," she said finally. "That's appropriate," Eli said, his small voice steady. "But I should mention that refusal without legal cause could be discriminatory under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause." Her supervisor came out, then the county legal counsel. Within 20 minutes, the entire clerk's office was whispering about the boy lawyer. When the stamp finally came down, officially accepting his motion, Eli gave a small nod of thanks. "Court date is set for next Tuesday," Mrs. Allen said softly. Eli smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you for doing the right thing." By evening, word had spread through the city like a spark in dry grass. Tenants whispered about the little boy who had filed a real case against Victor Lang, the same man who had ruined hundreds of families. In apartment buildings across Fairview, mothers began searching for old photos, letters, inspection reports, anything that proved they too had been cheated. A movement was beginning, and none of them even realized it yet. That night, Eli sat at the kitchen table, papers spread across every inch of space. Renee walked in quietly and set down a cup of tea beside him. "Baby, I can't believe you did that," she said softly. "You really filed it?" He nodded. "We're not alone anymore, Mama. Other families are coming forward. Mr. Lopez from 3A brought me pictures of his leaking roof. Mrs. Diaz found copies of her repair requests." Renee's eyes filled with tears. "You're turning neighbors into witnesses." "No, Mama," Eli said, looking up at her. "I'm turning victims into fighters." But Victor Lang wasn't about to be outdone by a child. The next morning, he walked into his lawyer's office fuming. "I want this case buried," he snapped. His attorney, Richard Klein, adjusted his gold cufflinks. "We'll file a motion to dismiss. The court will laugh us out before this kid says a word." Lang smirked. "Good. Make an example of them." But the laughter wouldn't last long. Days later, Renee collapsed at work. Her body gave up after weeks of overwork and hunger. Eli waited in the hospital's cold hallway, staring at the IV line in her arm. The doctor spoke gently but with concern. "Your mother needs rest, son. She's malnourished and exhausted. If she doesn't slow down, it'll get worse." Eli nodded. But inside he knew there would be no peace until this was over. When he got home that night, he turned on the dim lamp, opened his briefcase, and whispered to himself, "They broke the wrong family." For hours, he dug through public databases. He searched case files, property records, inspection archives, anything tied to Lang's empire. His small fingers typed furiously, copying notes into a spiral notebook. By dawn, his eyes burned, but he had found something. A pattern too perfect to be coincidence. Every building owned by Victor Lang had the same inspection failures before tenants ever moved in. The same damage. The same photos reused in lawsuits. The same judge's name signed at the bottom. Judge Samuel Harrison. Eli froze. He scrolled through more records. Over 900 cases, nearly all decided in favor of landlords. 98%. A mathematical impossibility without bias. And then, tucked away in financial disclosures, he found it. Harrison's name listed as a member of a private golf club. Membership fees, paid by the Fairview Landlords Association, the same organization chaired by Victor Lang. The system wasn't broken. It was built this way. The next morning, Eli told his mother quietly, "Mama, I found proof the judge is connected to Lang." Her breath caught. "Eli, you can't. These are powerful people. They can ruin lives." He looked her in the eyes. "They already tried to ruin ours. Now it's our turn to fight back." 2 days before trial, Eli uncovered something even darker, financial records showing that Judge Harrison personally owned shares in Lang's company. That was no bias. That was criminal conflict of interest. Eli copied every document, every record, and hid backups in a sealed envelope beneath his floorboard. The day before court, Renee found him asleep on a pile of books, still clutching a pen. She brushed a hand through his hair. "You're just a boy, Eli," she whispered. "You shouldn't have to carry this." His eyes opened. "Then why did God give me the strength to?" The next morning, Fairview's courthouse was overflowing. Cameras lined the steps. People whispered the name, the little lawyer. Some came to mock, others to hope. Inside, Eli stood at the defendant's table beside his mother. On the other side sat Victor Lang, his army of expensive lawyers, and Judge Harrison, the man whose hands were anything but clean. When the judge entered, the bailiff shouted, "All rise." But this time, Eli didn't stand because he was told to. He stood because the truth was about to stand with him. The trial was about to begin. The room buzzed like a hive about to swarm. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, notebooks ready. The air smelled of paper, perfume, and quiet fear. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and stared down at the boy in the oversized jacket. "This proceeding is an embarrassment to the court," he began. "Children do not practice law here. This is not a playground." Victor Lang's attorney, Richard Klein, rose with a smirk. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss this farce immediately. Allowing a child to speak in court would make a mockery of the justice system." Laughter rippled through the gallery again. Eli waited until the noise faded, then stepped forward. His voice was calm, clear. "Your Honor, I appear as next friend under Federal Rule 17. My standing has been verified by the clerk's office and accepted into record. If anyone wishes to challenge that, I request they cite a specific legal precedent that forbids it." The judge froze. For a long second, no one moved. Then Klein scoffed, flipping through his binder. That rule doesn't— It does, Eli interrupted softly. Section C. A person who lacks capacity may sue by an ex-friend. My mother is incapacitated by medical stress directly caused by this litigation. The rule doesn't specify age. It specifies necessity. Even Harrison blinked. His voice wavered. Proceed, but I warn you, any misstep and this hearing ends. Eli nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. I don't intend to waste the court's time with games. Only truth. Klein began his opening with the confidence of a man who'd never lost. Ladies and gentlemen, this family destroyed a property worth over $50,000 in damage. The evidence will show clear neglect, vandalism, and an unwillingness to care for the space they were given. He spoke for nearly 15 minutes, parading photographs of water stains and cracked walls, pretending outrage while Lang sat beside him looking proud. When he finished, he glanced at Eli and smirked. Your turn, counselor. Eli rose slowly. Every eye followed him. Your Honor, Mr. Klein's argument rests on one question. Who caused the damage? Let's start there. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a small stack of photographs. These were taken by my mother the week we moved in, 2 years ago. Every stain, every crack, every broken pipe Mr. Lang blames us for existed long before we arrived. He handed the photos to the clerk. The timestamps glowed clear on every print. The gallery began murmuring. Additionally, Eli said, I have written repair requests we submitted repeatedly to Lang Properties, none of which received response. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Objection? He asked the landlord's side. Klein stood quickly. Your Honor, this child is obviously being coached. Objection overruled, Harrison muttered before he seemed to realize what he was saying. Proceed. Eli took a slow breath. Mr. Lang sues working families for conditions that existed before they ever signed a lease. He profits by their fear. He wins every time because people like us can't afford to fight. He turned to the gallery. But that changes today. Lang shifted in his seat. His attorney whispered something urgently. The judge looked increasingly pale. Eli pressed forward. Under the implied warranty of habitability, tenants are guaranteed a safe, livable home. Mr. Lang violated that repeatedly. He also falsified inspection reports. I have documents proving those inspections were done months before we moved in. The courtroom buzzed again. The boy wasn't guessing. He had evidence. Those documents, Eli continued, list every crack and mold patch that Mr. Lang now claims my family caused. It's the same damage, identical photos reused across multiple lawsuits. Klein shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. No, Eli said quietly. What's outrageous is profiting from human misery. He walked to the table and laid down a printed record. There's something else. Judge Harrison has presided over nearly 900 housing cases involving Lang Properties. He's ruled in their favor in over 98% of them. That's not justice, that's partnership. Gasps filled the room. Harrison's hand trembled as he slammed his gavel. Order! Mr. Carter, you will refrain from— Your Honor, Eli said, meeting his gaze. Before I go further, I respectfully request a recess to submit additional evidence regarding potential conflicts of interest affecting this courtroom's integrity. A long silence followed. Harrison's lips twitched. He could feel every eye on him, the weight of the press cameras behind the benches. Recess granted, he finally muttered. The gallery erupted into noise as people stood whispering. Eli quietly packed his papers. Renee squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. What are you doing, Eli? She whispered. Finishing what they started, Mama, he said. We're not done yet. In the hallway, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Tenants from across the city gathered, some holding old eviction notices, others photos of crumbling walls. A woman from Lang's building in the next neighborhood shouted, That boy's telling the truth. He sued me too. The crowd swelled, the sound of decades of silence breaking at once. Victor Lang tried to push through the crowd, but the reporters caught him. Mr. Lang, did you know about these inspection reports? Did you pay for the judge's club membership? Lang shoved past without a word. His face was ashen. Down the hall, Eli and Renee stood alone by the vending machines. She touched his shoulder gently. Baby, I'm scared, she said softly. You're making enemies of powerful people. Eli looked up at her, small and certain. They were always powerful, Mama. I'm just making them visible. He opened his briefcase again. Inside were printed records, highlighted pages, and one thin folder labeled Financial Disclosures, Judge Harrison. He met her eyes. When we go back in there, I'm not just defending us anymore. I'm exposing them all. And as the clock ticked toward the end of recess, the noise outside grew into a storm. Every journalist, every tenant, every whisper carried the same name, the boy who might actually bring the system down. Inside courtroom 4, the bailiff called for order once more. The next round was about to begin, and this time even Judge Harrison knew it would not end the way he expected. When everyone filed back into the courtroom, the air felt heavier than before, thick with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Judge Harrison adjusted his robe with stiff fingers. Victor Lang sat stone-faced, his lawyers whispering frantically, passing papers back and forth as if they could block what was coming. Eli stood again at the defendant's table, his briefcase open, his documents spread neatly before him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. "Before we return to Mr. Lang's claims, I must address a matter that concerns the integrity of this court." The judge's gavel tapped once. "Proceed carefully, Mr. Carter." "I intend to," Eli said. "Public records show that you, Judge Harrison, own shares in Lang Development Group, the parent company of Lang Properties. You have not disclosed this interest in any of your rulings. Additionally, records confirm that your membership at Ridgeway Country Club has been paid annually by the Fairview Landlords Association, chaired by the plaintiff, Mr. Lang." The gallery gasped. The reporters were already typing, fingers flying across keyboards. The judge's face drained of color. "That is a serious accusation." Eli stepped forward, holding out a folder. "Not an accusation, sir, documentation." He placed it on the clerk's table. "Investment records, tax filings, and copies of the association's payments. They were obtained through public access under the state's Open Records Act." Richard Klein jumped up, his voice breaking. "This is a child's fantasy, Mr. Klein," Eli said evenly. "Perjury penalties apply to all statements made in this courtroom. Are you prepared to swear under oath that these records are false?" Klein froze, his mouth hanging open. The question hung there like a weight no one wanted to touch. Judge Harrison slammed the gavel again. "This hearing will recess for review." Before he could finish, a court officer stepped through the side door and handed him a note. The judge's eyes scanned the page. Then he looked up, pale and sweating. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice shaking. "I am recusing myself from this case. Another judge will preside." The room exploded in sound. Reporters shouted questions, tenants cheered, and Lang's lawyers tried to gather their things. But Eli didn't celebrate. He stood still, quietly closing his briefcase as if he'd known all along this was only the first domino. An hour later, a new judge entered the courtroom. She was older, calm, her eyes steady. "Judge Patricia Moore," she introduced herself. "We will proceed under new supervision. Let's continue with evidence." Eli nodded, stepped forward, and began to rebuild the story piece by piece. "Your Honor," he said, "the photographs Mr. Lang provided as proof of damage match inspection images taken months before my family moved in. These are the same cracks, the same stains. The timestamps confirm it." He placed both sets of photos side by side. The resemblance was perfect. Too perfect. Mrs. Allen, the clerk from earlier, whispered to another employee, "It's the same picture. He just changed the date." Furthermore, Eli continued, records show that Mr. Lang's company filed over 400 similar lawsuits in the past 3 years, each using identical evidence templates. This isn't about one apartment. It's a pattern of fraud. Lang shifted uncomfortably, his hand gripping the edge of the table. Eli turned toward him. "Mr. Lang, under oath, do you deny that your company reused inspection photos from other properties in previous lawsuits?" Lang hesitated. "Those records are irrelevant." "They're directly relevant," Eli interrupted, "because they prove intent to deceive." Judge Moore leaned forward. "Answer the question, Mr. Lang." Lang licked his lips. "I don't recall the details of every—" "So you don't deny it?" Eli pressed. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights." The courtroom gasped again. The sound rippled through the benches. Eli turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I move that this court order an investigation into Lang Properties for systematic fraud and obstruction of justice. The evidence supports criminal liability." Judge Moore looked down at the papers for a long time. "Motion granted," she said finally. All eviction cases associated with Lang properties are suspended pending review. Renee clapped a hand over her mouth. She couldn't breathe. After all the years of fear, this felt like sunlight after a storm, but Eli wasn't done. "Your Honor, there's one more matter," he said. "The plaintiff's actions caused medical and financial harm to my mother. She lost employment due to false accusations and emotional distress caused by harassment and intimidation. We seek damages for fraud, defamation, and violation of the implied warranty of habitability." Judge Moore read silently, then nodded once. "Proceed with evidence." Eli handed over time-stamped letters from Renee's employers showing pressure from Lang's associates. There were phone logs, photos, signed statements from neighbors. Every page another brick in a wall of truth. Klein tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "You'll have your chance, counselor, if you can refute any of this without perjuring yourself." By now, the atmosphere in the room had changed. The laughter was gone. Reporters weren't smirking, they were documenting history. Families who had once been invisible were standing, tears in their eyes, as the boy who represented them all spoke truth in plain words. When he finally finished, Judge Moore leaned back, eyes on the stack of evidence. "This court finds sufficient proof of fraud, intentional harm, and judicial misconduct. Mr. Lang's assets are frozen pending investigation. Damages are awarded to the defendant, Renee Carter, in the amount of $500,000. The sound that followed wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. People cried, hugged, shouted. Renee covered her face and sobbed. Lang sat in stunned silence, his empire unraveling faster than he could breathe. The judge struck her gavel one final time. "Justice is not a privilege," she said quietly. "It is a right." Court is adjourned. But even as people celebrated, Eli stood motionless for a moment longer. He looked around at the sea of faces, the families, the children, the people who finally saw a system bend instead of break them, and whispered, almost to himself, "We're not finished yet." Outside, reporters swarmed him on the courthouse steps. Microphones flashed. "Eli, how did you do it? What's next for you?" He looked straight into the cameras. "What's next," he said softly, "is to make sure this never happens again." The wind caught his jacket as he walked down the steps beside his mother. The crowd parted for them, people reaching out, thanking, crying. Renee held his hand tight, and though he was only 9, he walked like someone much older, like someone who had carried his family, his community, and maybe even the idea of justice itself, all the way to daylight. The weeks that followed felt like a second sunrise over Fairview. What had begun as a single court case became a storm that swept through the whole county. News channels called it the Carter case. But to the people who'd lived under Victor Lang's shadow, it was something bigger, their first real breath of freedom. Families who had been silent for years started coming forward. They brought boxes of documents, eviction notices, letters, photos, proof of what they had suffered. For the first time, the city listened. Investigators from the state attorney's office arrived, digging into Lang's company records, tracing every fraudulent claim. Every stone they turned over revealed more rot. Fake inspections, duplicate photos, false signatures, and money flowing quietly into the same pockets of power. Lang's empire fell piece by piece. Within a month, he was arrested for criminal fraud, racketeering, and coercion. His companies froze under court order. And in every neighborhood where he once ruled with fear, tenants stood outside their buildings, laughing for the first time in years. Eli and Renee stayed quiet in their small apartment, watching it all unfold on a flickering television. "Baby," Renee whispered one evening, tears glimmering, "you did it. You stopped him." Eli looked at her, his voice steady. "We did it, Mama. You taught me what right and wrong look like. I just made sure everyone else saw it too." He spent days after the trial reading letters, hundreds of them, from people across the country. Parents thanking him. Children saying he gave them hope. One message came from an elderly man who had lost his home 10 years earlier. He wrote, "I thought justice was only for those who could afford it. You proved me wrong. But victory had a cost. Eli had lost sleep, missed childhood, and aged in ways invisible to everyone but his mother. Some nights he still woke up gasping, hearing echoes of laughter from that courtroom, the laughter that had started it all. Then one morning, a letter came addressed to him. It bore a seal from Harvard University. He turned it over in his hands, hesitant to open it. Renee nudged him. "Go on, baby." Inside was a simple message. "In recognition of extraordinary promise and courage, we are offering you early admission to Harvard Law School. Full scholarship." He stared at it, almost not believing. Renee's laughter broke the silence, a sound full of pride and relief and wonder. "Looks like the world's ready for you, counselor," she said softly. 5 years later, the world still remembered his name. At 14, Eli stood in the halls of Harvard, the youngest student in its history. Professors who had once dismissed his story as media fantasy now handed him books and asked questions about his theories on justice. Students whispered about the boy who brought down an empire. Back home, Renee had opened the Carter Justice Foundation, offering free legal aid to low-income families. She wore her exhaustion differently now, like a medal instead of a burden. Fairview itself changed too. The buildings once owned by Lang were converted into tenant-owned cooperatives. Families became homeowners. Streets that used to echo with arguments now rang with children's laughter. The mold was gone. The fear was gone. The city felt alive again. Even Judge Harrison's name disappeared from the courthouse wall after his conviction for corruption. When reporters asked Eli how he felt about that, he said only, "Justice doesn't need revenge, it just needs truth." Years later, Eli returned to the same courthouse where the story had begun. The benches had been replaced, the walls freshly painted, but he could still feel the weight of that day. He stood in the middle of the empty courtroom, hearing the faint echo of that old gavel and the laughter that had turned into silence. He whispered, almost to himself, "This is where everything changed." He ran a hand along the polished bench, the same place where he had stood trembling years ago. Then he smiled, a small, quiet smile that belonged to someone who had already seen too much but still believed in goodness. He turned and saw a little girl standing in the doorway, maybe 8 or 9 years old, holding her mother's hand. She looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are you the boy lawyer?" she asked shyly. Eli chuckled. "Not a boy anymore," he said. "Just someone who believes rules should protect people, not destroy them." The girl nodded seriously. "I want to do what you did." He knelt down to her level. "Then never stop asking why," he said softly. "Every time you see something unfair, ask why it's allowed. That's where justice starts." She smiled, and for a moment, Eli saw himself in her, a spark of defiance against a world that thought children couldn't change anything. When he walked out into the sun, the crowd outside wasn't there for a trial anymore. It was a celebration. The foundation had helped thousands of families across the state, and the city was naming a new community center in his honor, the Carter House for Legal Hope. As he stepped onto the stage, applause swelled from the crowd, families, workers, students, all the people whose voices had once been drowned out by power. Renee stood at the edge, tears of joy streaming down her face. Eli took the microphone and waited for the cheering to fade. "People ask what winning feels like," he began. "But winning isn't the point. Justice isn't a prize, it's a responsibility. What matters is what we do when nobody's listening, when the whole world says we can't make a difference." He paused, letting his words settle. "I was laughed at once, told I was too young, too small, too poor. But truth doesn't care about size or age. Truth only needs someone brave enough to speak it." He looked out over the crowd, faces of every color, every struggle, every story, and his voice softened. "The world doesn't change because of miracles. It changes because ordinary people decide they've had enough. That's all I did. That's all anyone has to do." For a moment there was perfect silence. Then applause thundered again, rising like a wave that rolled through every street of Fairview. Eli closed his eyes and thought of that first day in court. The laughter, the fear, his mother's trembling hand in his. He thought of all the people who'd been afraid to speak until someone small stood up and showed them how. And when he opened his eyes again, he wasn't the boy in the thrift store suit anymore. He was the proof that one voice, even a child's, could shake the pillars of power and make the world listen. He smiled and whispered the same words that had carried him through every dark night. "Justice isn't given. It's claimed." Then he raised his head toward the sun, and for the first time in years it felt like the whole world was standing up with him.